All right, let's go ahead and take a look at, I think, some of the biggest issues facing the state right now is education. A lot of people are talking about it, so I'm going to go over to Sasha for the first question on education.
Several of our listeners have questions about education, and Judith wanted to ask specifically about what your plans are for schools. So, do you believe that schools in Michigan they have what they need to succeed and to serve all students, including special needs students? And do you think that schools are funded equitably?
No, and no. That's a simple, quick answer. Here's what I know. People from around the world used to come to our state for opportunity, right? You get a good job that paid you well enough you could raise a family on it and retire with dignity in the state. And no matter what community you called home, your kids were going to have a phenomenal public school education. DPS was the finest school system in a state full of great schools. Right now, though, because of years of neglect, because of years of underfunding, because of years of attacks on people who go into education, we are now last in the Midwest and we are bottom 10 in our country where we used to lead the world, and it's unconscionable. And it's not right. We're all paying a price for schools that aren't getting our kids to a place where they are going to be set up for success, where we've leveled the playing field for every child in the state, which is what education does and can do when it's done right. My mom taught in Lansing, my grandma taught in Waterford, my grandfather was a superintendent of Pontiac Public Schools. I'm a product of our public schools, and I've got kids in our public schools. We are not doing right by our kids. So first and foremost, the question was, are we doing enough? Unequivocally, no. We've got to do better by our children, and that means not punishing third graders who aren't literate. It means wrapping them around with the supports they need so every child is literate. Tripling the number of literacy coaches, having universal early childhood education so every child coming into kindergarten is ready to learn, and giving our heroes who go into public education the support that they need. We've got another crisis looming here in Michigan, and that is the fact that fewer and fewer people are going into education in the first place because the ranks of our teachers and parapros and counselors are just absolutely demoralized because of the continuous attacks, and we've got to treat them with respect, make sure that there's not a teacher in the state that has to rely on the state for help to put money or put food on the table by signing up for the bridge card. So we've got a lot of things to tackle, but it also includes a weighted foundation allowance, which I think goes to the heart of the part 2 of the question. Study after study shows that kids in high poverty districts cost more to educate, and we have to make a greater investment. That means, more nurses and social workers, smaller class sizes, literacy coaches, those wraparound supports that I was talking about. Our historical funding in Michigan, that we've got wealthy districts and we've got high poverty districts. In the high poverty districts, we're spending less to educate kids that we know we should actually be making a greater investment in. And so I don't want to just move resources from one district to another. I want to make a greater investment in our kids' schools by stopping the raids on the school aid fund. Just doing that alone, you can get about $700 million annually back into our education system, and having a weighted foundation allowance, which will help us make sure we've got the supports for kids in the higher poverty districts, because that is, study after study tells you that needs to be the case, and I don't think we need to study anymore. I think we got to do right by our kids.
Let me ask about testing, about accountability systems. They are often really focused on the socioeconomics as opposed to what's really happening in schools.
Mm-hmm.
How would you use accountability systems in schools?
So there's no question that we have to measure to see what's working and what's not working. I mean, this is not just an experiment. This is about setting our kids up for a lifetime of health and wealth and opportunity, or failing them and setting them up for the other trajectory. And it's unconscionable. But we have to know what is happening and to be able to measure it. The standardized tests that our kids are taking and taking and taking aren't being used to really make tweaks in the curriculum or in the teaching or in the investment in our schools. It's being used as a tool of punishment. We're over testing. And so there, I believe, are better ways to analyze whether or not we have success. And less testing is a part of that, but testing the right things, measuring the right things, measuring growth as opposed to proficiency. And I recognize that there's a difference, even though I think on the national level there's been some debate what they mean. But what we really know is that where a child comes into school versus the end of the school year, how much they've grown is really what tells you if what we're doing in our schools is successful. And I think that's got to be where we focus.
Gretchen, are you suggesting that we should be changing the standardized testing? We've already gone from the MEP to the M step. Are you suggesting another change?
No, I think that we've got to have a stable test. We've got to have the same test so that we can have longitudinal ability to look at whether or not what we're doing is working. This change in the test every year is making everyone crazy, and it's giving us no data from which to really analyze what's happening. It's making it harder on our children, it's making it harder on our educators, and it's not helping parents assess what's happening either. And so I think we have to have a commitment to one test and keep it for a longer time than a legislature that comes in and out. But we also need to do less testing. I think that you can do less testing and get more data with a stable test that'll help us make sure we're getting the results that we need.
Sasha talked a little bit about accountability. Let me ask you this. Should the state be making school closure decisions, the Michigan Department of Education? Should we be at that level where they're making the decisions of what schools should be closed down or not based on the achievement?
Well, when the governor went forward and started the process of trying to close schools, you have to ask yourself, what is the remedy here? The first and only question I think that we should be asking around education is, how are the children doing? And I don't know that question gets asked enough when it comes to decisions that are made around education. The thought that you punish families by closing down the option that they have, that's going to somehow produce a better result, is completely backward thinking. When you look at states that are turning around districts, they put more resources in. They don't abandon families. They don't make it harder for them to find education for their children. They improve the education system. They double down on it. It's not just a matter of putting more dollars into it. It's also doing things differently, assessing what works and what doesn't, and getting to work, rolling up your sleeves and making the changes that we need to. But this thought that you just close districts that aren't meeting our expectations is completely backwards, and it leaves people without options, and that's the worst case scenario.
Let's talk a little bit about Detroit Public Schools Community District. Steve?
Obviously, Detroit has the largest public school district in the state. Recently released a facilities report saying that it would cost $500 million to bring the district's school buildings up to current standards. But the state law gets in the way of that. It won't let the district borrow money to do those type of renovations. What should Lansing do here? Should Lansing make it easier for the district to borrow money, or should Lansing step up and help pay that very large bill?
Well, I think that's an important and great question. When I was in the legislature, I introduced year after year the ability to open up the purposes for which sinking funds can be used. It's such a limited purpose, and there are so many districts that have balances. Now, I don't know what Detroit Public Schools circumstances on that front in particular, so I don't know if this would have helped alleviate that. But I've been throwing solutions on the table for a long time. I've been in the minority and unable to get them signed into law, but that will change after this election. And I believe we've got to give districts some flexibility to raise the revenue if they can, but it's on the state to ensure that every child has a good facility in which to learn, that the quality of the facility has a direct impact on the quality of the education that's happening within it. I do believe ultimately the role is of our state government to ensure every child in this state has a great public school education. Despite what the federal court said, despite what Bill Schuette and Governor Snyder say, I believe every child in the state has a constitutional right to literacy. I believe you have a birthright to a good education. And it includes having a great teacher in your classroom, having facilities that promote the kind of learning that today's day and age requires. And all of these are pieces of that, and until we get that right, nothing else matters. I mean, there are things that matter. I guess that's an overstatement. But until we get that right, we're not going to realize the real economic possibilities in this state, because we're not getting the core, the backbone of our society. It's not strong enough, and it's hurting our ability to draw people into our state. It's hurting our ability to lift people out of poverty within our state, and it's holding families back.
But how much should taxpayers in Grand Rapids and Mount Pleasant and up in the UP contribute to the quality of Detroit public schools? Should that just be something that the citizens of Detroit have to take care of, or is that something, because it is such a large bill, that does have to be spread out at least somewhat across the state?
Well, we all have an interest in educating all the children of this state. No child picks what family, what school district, what zip code they're born into, but every one of them deserves a great education to level the playing field. And we all benefit when we are that state. If we could say, come to Michigan because our public schools are the best, everyone in Michigan benefits when that happens. We're at risk of losing another congressional seat. Our population is not growing at the same clip that other states are, and it's hurting all of us when that happens. And so this is a statewide responsibility. This is a statewide necessity. We all hurt when people in Flint can't drink their water. We're all paying a price for that. Not nearly as dear a price as the people of Flint are, obviously, but every one of us is. These are core investments that are the foundation and dinner table issues that families across Michigan are worried about, that businesses across Michigan are worried about. One of the things that I've seen in the last few weeks that's given me, some hope that we can pull the business sector that hasn't really been at the table around education issues is watching the Detroit Chamber and SBAM come to a coalition with teachers to figure out how do we get education right in Michigan. It's long overdue. We're failing generations of Michigan kids right now, and we get one shot to educate them, and we got to do it right. All kids in Michigan.
Hassan?
Do you think Michigan should make reforms to laws regarding how charter schools are governed and funded?
I do. I was not a fan of charter schools when they first came on the scene. I opposed lifting the cap on them. Michigan is an outlier when you look at other states in the nation that have charter schools. So many of ours are for-profit. There are not enough accountability measurements written into the law. There are the whole theory behind charter schools was that they would be untethered to the traditional oversights, and so they'd be able to innovate and have better results. But after decades of this, we now have seen they don't necessarily have better results. Sure, some have had some success, but as a general rule, they're on par with public schools, and so it's not a great quality choice that we're giving families and education in Michigan. So yeah, we need to have accountability, and charters that aren't working shouldn't be siphoning taxpayer dollars out of our public schools, and they should not be in existence. And especially when a lot of 84% of them have a for-profit motivation, we have a duty to hold them accountable, not just to taxpayers, but most importantly for the kids that are attending them.
So then you don't think that funds allocated for public schools should be used to fund charter schools as well?
That's not what I said. What I said was that we have a duty to make sure that our kids are getting well educated, period, no matter what school they are in. That is on us as a state to ensure that every child is getting the education that they need. And if a charter school is not performing, they shouldn't be in business. We have to know if they're performing, and that's why holding them to accountable standards, making them transparent, ensuring that they've got qualified teachers in the classroom, ensuring that they're not picking and choosing what students they provide education to. These are important oversights that the state has a role in and should have a role in. Charters have given some families a good option, but by and large, ones that aren't working are just siphoning resources out of the traditional public schools and putting money in their pockets, and that's wrong.
Sasha?
What can the state do to make preschool and childcare options more accessible and available and affordable?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we have proposed in my Jobs in the Economy plan is drawing down more resources from the federal government. Right now, we could be giving tax breaks to families for childcare, and we're not. We could expand early childhood education, which starting our kids off as 4-year-olds would help alleviate some of that. There are a lot of different things that are available, even from the federal government, that we're not making use of here in Michigan. One of the things that I think was so disheartening in recent weeks, Governor Snyder signed into law the bill about Medicaid work requirements, taking health care away from a lot of people in our state, chipping away at what I think is the best part of, what's happened in the last 8 years. There's a lot that I'm unhappy about, but when he and I worked on that, I was really proud of that. And I know that was important to him, but the legislature sent him this work requirement bill and he signed it in, and it's not really about getting people to work. It's about taking health care away, because if it was about getting people to work, it would be giving people more opportunities for skills training. It would be leveling the barriers like childcare for families. It would be focused on making sure everyone's got transportation to get to work. And that's not what they did. They just took health care away from people. And so young families with young kids are struggling. The cost of health care and child care eats up more and more of our family budgets. And that's what's holding people back from getting ahead. And that's why I think that the state utilizing our schools to make that a place where kids can start earlier, that giving parents tax breaks so that they can get some relief for the crazy cost of childcare is a part of that as well.
Sandra?
Well, we've talked about K-12 education. You just talked about early childhood and child care. Let's turn to higher education. Do you believe that the cost of higher education in Michigan is cost prohibitive now? And if so, what would you as governor have the ability and wherewithal and agenda to do about it?
Well, it is. I mean, it just is. When I went to Michigan State University, the taxpayers, I think, picked up about 70% of the cost of my education. And it was on me and my family to come up with the rest. Now it's just about flip-flopped. And we've had this mindset in the last 20 years that the only way to a career that an honorable career that you can make a good living in is through a 4-year degree. And so we've kind of pushed this mantra out there and stigmatized other paths. And now we're paying a price for it, because we created this assumption and then we cut out people's ability to afford it. And so now here in Michigan, the state that used to have the most skilled workforce on the planet, we have too few people in 4-year degrees. We have too few people in 2-year degrees. We've got too few people in the trades in Michigan. And so, yes, I believe that it's critical that we open up all those paths. And so one of the pieces of my plan is the My Opportunity Scholarship, which is a path to a 2-year degree, a debt-free 2-year degree for every Michigander. We can use the cost or that kind of an investment toward bringing down the cost of a 4-year degree, and also opening up paths into the skilled trades. We've got to make it real, make it affordable for people to pursue whichever is their path. There is honor. You can make a darn good living in the trades. You can make a good living. We're looking for nurses in Michigan. I mean, I know in the paper today, the anticipated shortage of sales reps, of truck drivers, of nurses. I mean, of all these walks, there is a good living to be made in this state. But we've got to help people get the skills so that they can get into those better paying jobs.
Just a quick follow-up so everyone will think, wow, we can all get a 2-year degree. How are we all going to pay for that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's actually not enormously expensive. When you crunch the numbers, we've looked at it. It's about $100 million a year. Right now in our rainy day fund, I mean, we're socking money away when we should be making those investments in ourselves.
So you would take the money from the rainy day fund for that?
I think when you've got a $50 billion budget, $100 million is a small piece of what I think is in the budget to pay for this, and I think we would find fantastic return on that kind of an investment. I spoke with a young man from Grand Rapids not long ago. He's a dishwasher. He takes care of his mother, a young man who wants to become an electrician. The thing that's standing in his way is the $6,000 it takes to go to the community college and get the skills he needs. We need electricians. You can make a really good living as an electrician in Michigan. You can be your own boss. You can make $60,000, $70,000 a year, but he doesn't have the $6,000 to get those skills. We want him to make a good living in Michigan. We want him to take care of his family. We want him to be a good taxpayer too, with a great job. So this is the kind of short-term problem that we've created in Michigan that we can fix pretty quickly. But we've got to make that investment, and it's such an enormous return on the investment for the state and for the taxpayer that it's foolish not to do it.